The buzzing energy of downtown Atlanta swirled around the entrance of the high-end clothing store. Prestige wear. Sleek glass panels gleamed under the mid-morning sun, the store's name etched in gold letters that whispered luxury. Inside, an air of sophistication reigned. Polished floors gleamed like mirrors, soft jazz floated through the space, and neatly folded designer garments lined pristine shelves. The occasional chime of the door opening brought in customers dressed in everything. From tailored suits to casual athleisure, their steps muted against the plush carpet. Yet, beneath the polished surface, a subtle tension hung in the air, like a song slightly out of tune. Darius Carter hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his reflection staring back at him from the immaculate glass doors. To the world, he was the picture of quiet confidence. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, his sharp features softened only by a well-groomed beard. Today, however, he had traded his usual custom-tailored suits for a simple hoodie and jeans. A baseball cap sat low on his head, partially shadowing his piercing eyes. He wanted to blend in, to feel what it was like to walk into his own store as just another customer. No fanfare, no corporate title, no billion-dollar name. Just Darius. As the CEO of Prestige Wear, Darius had built the brand from the ground up, pouring his blood, sweat, and late nights into creating a company that represented excellence. It wasn't just about clothes. It was about empowerment, about giving people a sense of pride when they looked in the mirror. But recently, whispers had reached his ears. Rumors of poor customer service, complaints of favoritism, and an unsettling sense that his vision for the brand was being tarnished. He needed to see for himself. The cool air conditioning washed over him as he entered, mingling with the faint aroma of leather and cedar. His gaze swept the room, taking in the staff stationed strategically around the store. A young woman with a polished smile greeted a group of customers near the handbags. Two associates whispered near the men's section, glancing occasionally at the clock as though counting the hours until their shift ended. Darius moved quietly, his sneakers barely making a sound as he approached a display of premium jackets. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm as he gestured toward a black leather jacket. It was one of their best sellers, a piece he had personally approved during design meetings. The employee closest to him, a tall, wiry man in his late 20s with a name tag that read Jamal, barely glanced in his direction. "Yeah, just a sec," he muttered, his eyes glued to his phone. Darius blinked, caught off guard by the dismissive tone. He waited, expecting Jamal to set his phone down and approach, but the younger man didn't move. Instead, he tapped at the screen with a smirk, as if the customer standing before him was nothing more than an afterthought. "Excuse me," Darius repeated, this time louder, the edge in his voice sharpening. Jamal sighed audibly and looked up, his expression somewhere between annoyance and boredom. His eyes swept over Darius's casual attire, lingering just long enough to betray a flicker of judgment. "Yeah, what do you need?" he said flatly, not bothering to mask the irritation in his tone. "I was wondering if you had this jacket in a large," Darius said, forcing himself to keep his voice even. He felt the prickle of heat rise to his neck, not from embarrassment, but from the slow burn of disappointment. Was this how his customers were being treated? Jamal didn't bother checking the shelves or even glancing at the stockroom. Instead, he shrugged. "If it's not out here, we probably don't have it," he said, already turning his attention back to his phone. A spark of anger flared in Darius's chest. He clenched his jaw, his mind racing with a mix of disbelief and frustration. Wanted to tell Jamal who he was, to pull rank and demand an explanation for the unprofessionalism. But no, not yet. He needed to see how far this would go. Taking a deep breath, he moved deeper into the store, observing as he went. A pair of women, near the fitting rooms, exchanged whispers and giggles, their eyes darting toward him briefly before turning away. An older man in a tailored blazer browsed the watches, but received immediate attention from an associate who practically fawned over him. Darius noticed the pattern instantly. Some customers were treated like royalty, while others, like himself, were barely acknowledged. He made his way to the counter where a young woman with bright red hair was folding scarves. Her name tag read Emily, and she carried herself with a nervous energy, her hands moving quickly but not confidently. Darius waited until she looked up, her eyes widening slightly as she took him in. "Hi there," he said, offering a polite smile. "I'd like to ask about—" "Someone will be with you in a moment," she interrupted, her voice tight, almost rehearsed. She gestured vaguely toward the back of the store before turning her attention back to the scarves. Darius's patience was wearing thin. He leaned on the counter slightly, lowering his voice. "I don't think you understand, The sound of laughter interrupted him. He turned to see Jamal joking with another employee near the register, their conversation punctuated by the occasional glance in his direction. They weren't even subtle about it, their smirks carrying a weight that made Darius feel as though he were the punchline to some unspoken joke. Darius straightened, his heart pounding. This wasn't just bad service. This was a betrayal of everything he had built. Prestige Wear was supposed to be a brand that welcomed everyone, that treated every customer with dignity and respect. And yet, here he was standing in the very store he had poured his soul into, feeling like an outsider. His hands curled into fists at his sides as he took one last look around the store. The polished floors, the elegant displays, the carefully curated atmosphere. All of it felt hollow now, like a facade hiding something rotten underneath. He had seen enough. As he turned to leave, the door chimed again and a woman walked in, a mother with 2 young children in tow. She looked frazzled but determined, her eyes scanning the room for assistance. Darius paused, watching as she approached the counter where Emily stood. "Excuse me, could you help me find—" the mother began, but Emily cut her off with a curt, "One moment, please." Darius's jaw tightened. He couldn't walk away. Not yet. He stepped back into the store, his heart pounding as he prepared to intervene. But before he could, Jamal's voice rang out from behind him, loud enough for the entire store to hear. "Yo, man," Jamal called, a mocking grin spreading across his face. "You lost or something? 'Cause this ain't the thrift store." The room seemed to freeze, all eyes turning toward Darius. His chest tightened, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He met Jamal's gaze, his voice steady but cold. "I think it's time we had a conversation," Darius said, stepping forward. "And you might want to call your manager, now." Jamal snorted, his grin unfazed. "Yeah? And who are you supposed to be?" Darius removed his baseball cap, revealing his full face, his eyes burning with quiet intensity. "I'm the owner," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The store fell silent. Jamal's smirk faltered, his eyes widening. As realization dawned, Darius took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Let's talk." The silence in the store was deafening. Jamal's smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale, wide-eyed stare. Emily froze mid-fold, her hands clutching a scarf as though holding onto it would somehow save her from the moment. Even the other customers had gone still, their curious gazes bouncing between Darius and the staff like spectators awaiting the next move in a high-stakes chess game. Darius didn't flinch under the weight of their stares. He had faced far worse. His journey to becoming the CEO of Prestige Wear wasn't smooth. It was a gauntlet of setbacks, doubts, and decisions that had demanded everything from him. And moments like these, where his values were put to the test, reminded him why he fought so hard to build something different. The memory hit him like a whisper from the past, his grandmother's voice, steady and resolute, as she worked her sewing machine late into the night. She had raised him after his parents passed away, taking in extra tailoring work to make ends meet in their small apartment on the south side of Chicago. Her hands, worn from years of needlework, moved with precision as she stitched together garments for wealthy clients who didn't know her name. "You don't just sew a suit, Darius," she would say, glancing up at him through thick glasses. "You sew confidence, pride, and hope. You make people feel like they belong anywhere." Her words had stayed with him, even as he struggled to navigate a world that didn't always welcome him. In high school, teachers underestimated him. In college, investors questioned his ambition to create a luxury brand run by a kid from the South Side. And in the early years of prestige wear, doors slammed in his face more often than not. But Darius had grit. He had a vision. And he had promised his grandmother that he would never forget the lessons she taught him. Work hard, treat people with dignity, and never settle for mediocrity. Darius straightened his shoulders, his eyes sweeping the room. "Jamal," he said, calmly, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. "You and I need—" Jamal hesitated, glancing toward his co-worker near the register as if searching for backup. Yeah, sure," he said, his bravado evaporating. He shoved his phone into his pocket and stepped around the counter, his movements awkward and— "Sure." Darius turned his attention to Emily. "I'll want to speak with you as well, but for now, I need you to handle the customers. Make sure they're helped promptly." His tone wasn't harsh, but it left no room for argument. "Yes, sir," Emily stammered, her face flushed as she scurried to greet the frazzled mother by the fitting rooms. Darius gestured toward the back office, his eyes never leaving Jamal. "Let's go." The younger man shuffled toward the door, his steps hesitant. Darius followed, his mind racing with a mix of frustration and determination. Moments like these weren't just about addressing bad behavior. They were about setting a precedent. If his employees didn't embody the values prestige wear was built on, then everything he had worked for was at risk. The office was a modest space with a desk, a few chairs, and a bulletin board covered in schedules and motivational quotes. As Jamal sank into one of the chairs, Darius closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment to gather his thoughts. "What's going on, man?" Jamal blurted, his voice tinged with defensiveness. "I didn't know you were, like, the owner or whatever." "That's exactly the problem," Darius replied, his voice low but firm. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You didn't treat me or anyone else like a customer who mattered. And that's unacceptable." Jamal fidgeted, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it, it's just— I didn't think you were, serious about buying anything." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Because I wasn't wearing a suit? Or because I don't look like the typical customer you expect to see in a store like this?" Jamal's silence spoke volumes. "Let me tell you something," Darius continued, his tone softening but losing none of its weight. "I started this company because I wanted to create a brand that welcomed everyone, no matter where they came from or how they looked. Prestige wear is about more than clothes, it's about dignity. And right now, you're not representing that." Jamal looked down, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't think about it like that." "I need more than an apology," Darius said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I need to know you're willing to change, that you're willing to do better." The younger man nodded, his expression earnest. Yeah, I'll do better, I promise." Darius studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity in his eyes. "Good, because if you're not willing to uphold the values of this company, there's no place for you here. Do you understand?" Jamal nodded again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir." "All right," Darius said, stepping back. "You can go, but this conversation isn't over. We'll be revisiting this soon." Jamal stood, his posture still tense, and left the office without another word. As the door closed behind him, Darius let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. The encounter had taken more out of him than he expected. He had always believed in second chances. After all, he had been given one himself when a mentor took a chance on him years ago. But the weight of ensuring his employees understood the mission of prestige wear felt heavier than ever. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he called, straightening. Emily stepped inside, her hands clasped. Nervously in front of her, Mr. Carter, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have been more attentive earlier. Darius gestured for her to sit. Emily, tell me something. How long have you worked here? About 6 months, she said, her voice small. This is my first retail job. And how do you feel about it? Darius asked, his tone gentle. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. I like it, she said finally, but sometimes it feels like the customers don't respect me, or like I'm always messing up. Darius nodded, understanding the insecurity in her voice. I get it. Retail isn't easy, but let me ask you this. Do you believe in what this company stands for? In treating people with respect and making them feel like they belong? Yes, she said quickly, meeting his gaze. I do. Good, Darius said, offering her a small smile. Then don't lose sight of that. And if you ever feel overwhelmed or unsure, Emily nodded, her expression softening with relief. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Call me Darius, he said with a chuckle. Now let's both get back out there. As Emily left the office, Darius leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning, with everything he had observed. The store's culture needed work, serious work, and while he was proud of the empire he had built, he knew it wasn't enough to rest on past successes. Prestigeware had to evolve just as he had. Before he could dwell further, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw a text from an unknown number. You should watch your back. Not everyone wants to see you succeed. Darius stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. The message wasn't just cryptic, it was a reminder that the challenges he faced weren't confined to the walls of his store. And as much as he hated to admit it, this was just the beginning.